Admiral Jack Wilson stood alone at the podium, facing the United Earth Defense Council. His weathered hands gripped the edges of the display controller as he prepared to reveal his life's work. Behind him, a large holographic display showed only darkness, waiting for his command. "Distinguished members of the Council, thank you for your time today," he began, his voice steady despite the tension in his shoulders. "What I'm about to show you will change the course of human defense strategy forever." With a simple gesture, the display lit up. A massive ship materialized in the hologram. Unlike anything the Council had ever seen, instead of the sleek, practical designs that characterize modern spacecraft, this vessel seemed to bend in ways that hurt the eyes. Parts of its hull curved at impossible angles, and sections appeared to overlap with themselves in defiance of basic geometry. Councillor Patel, the head of the engineering division, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. "What exactly are we looking at, Admiral?" "This is the Thunderclap," Wilson replied, pride evident in his voice. "A new class of battleship that utilizes gravity manipulation technology in ways we've only theorized until now." The room filled with murmurs. The alien representative from the Orion Alliance, Ambassador Trell, clicked his mandibles in what humans had learned was a sign of disbelief. Wilson continued, undeterred. "The Thunderclap operates on principles that allow it to locally alter the fabric of space-time. This gives it unprecedented maneuverability, and more importantly, lets it generate and control sound waves in the vacuum of space." "That's impossible," stated Dr. Martin, Earth's leading physicist on the Council. "Sound cannot propagate through vacuum. It's a basic law of physics." Wilson smiled. "Conventional sound waves can't. But when you manipulate gravity fields to create compression waves in the fabric of space itself, you can generate effects that function essentially the same as sound, but with devastating consequences for enemy vessels." He tapped his controller, and the simulation began to run. The holographic thunderclap moved in ways that made several council members look away, uncomfortable with how their brains struggled to process the ship's movements. Then it released what appeared to be expanding rings of distortion. When these rings contacted enemy ships in the simulation, the vessels simply came apart, their hulls peeling open like fruit. "What you're showing defies multiple laws of physics," Dr. Martin said, her voice rising. "You cannot manipulate gravity with this level of precision without exotic matter, which we have no means of producing in quantity." Wilson nodded, as if he had expected this exact objection. "That's what makes the Thunderclap revolutionary. We've developed a new method of creating stable exotic matter using modified particle accelerator technology. The math checks out." He projected a series of complex equations onto the screen. Ambassador Trell rose from his seat, his four eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of extreme agitation. "I have reviewed thousands of species weapon systems in my role as military liaison. What you propose is not merely advanced, it should be impossible given humanity's current technological level." The room grew tense. Wilson had expected skepticism, but the outright dismissal in the alien's tone stung. "With all due respect, Ambassador," Wilson replied, "humans have a habit of achieving the impossible. 20 years ago, we were told faster than light travel was centuries beyond our reach. Yet here we are, with a fleet of FTL ships." General Reed, the head of military operations, had remained silent until now. "What are the power requirements for this vessel?" she asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer wouldn't be feasible. "Substantial," Wilson admitted. "The ship would require 3 times the output of our largest current reactors. But we've designed a new fusion containment system that—" "Enough," interrupted Councillor Patel. "Admiral Wilson, while we appreciate your creative thinking, what you're proposing would cost more than our entire fleet modernization budget. And that's assuming the physics even work, which multiple experts are telling us they don't." Wilson felt his chance slipping away. "I understand your concerns about cost, but consider the strategic advantage. One thunderclap could replace an entire battle group." Dr. Martin shook her head. "It's not just about cost, Admiral. Your equations make assumptions that contradict established physics. The gravitational manipulators would tear themselves apart before achieving the effects you're describing. The council voted almost immediately. The decision was unanimous, except for General Reed, who abstained. Project Thunderclap was denied funding, and Wilson was invited to take early retirement. 3 months later, Wilson cleared out his office at Earth Defense Headquarters. 30 years of service reduced to 2 small boxes of personal items. As he placed the last of his awards into the box, his office door slid open. "They're making a mistake," said Lieutenant Tom Miller, Wilson's most loyal assistant. The young officer stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly unsure if he should be there. Wilson smiled sadly. It wouldn't be the first time humanity has rejected a good idea because it seemed too impossible. "What will you do now, sir?" Instead of answering directly, Wilson reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data crystal, the complete designs for the Thunderclap. "All my research, simulations, everything." He held it out to Miller. The lieutenant took the crystal hesitantly. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because officially, I'm giving up. Retiring to a quiet life on my brother's farm in New Zealand." Wilson's eyes hardened with determination. "Unofficially, I've secured private funding from some forward-thinking investors. We have access to an abandoned lunar shipyard that's been forgotten since the war." Miller's eyes widened. "Sir, that's against regulations. Building unauthorized military hardware is exactly what we're going to do," Wilson finished for him. "I'm not asking you to join me, Tom, but I am asking you to keep that data safe. If I succeed, I'll contact you. If I fail," he shrugged, "then I'm just a crazy old man who couldn't accept that his big idea was impossible." Miller straightened his posture. "When do we start, sir?" Wilson grinned. "Already recruiting personnel. Scientists and engineers who believe in the project but were afraid to speak up against the council. We leave next week." As they walked out of Earth Defense Headquarters together for the last time, Wilson looked up at the stars, barely visible through Earth's atmosphere and light pollution. "They say it's impossible," he said quietly, "but they'll change their minds when they see it in action. And when the Thunderclap speaks, everything will be very, very loud." 3 years passed since Admiral Wilson's forced retirement. The stars looked different from the lunar surface, brighter and more numerous without an atmosphere to dim their light. Wilson stood at the viewport of the hidden shipyard, his reflection showing a man who had aged more than just 3 years. His hair had gone completely white, and deep lines marked his face. Behind him, the impossible was taking shape. "Power test successful, Admiral," called out Dr. Fiona Gray, the physicist who had quietly believed in his theories, even when she publicly had to deny them. "The gravity manipulators are operating at 87% efficiency." Wilson nodded without turning from the viewport. "Not good enough. We need at least 95% to maintain field stability during weapon discharge." A young engineer named Robert joined them, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "The problem is in the containment rings. The exotic matter is putting more strain on them than we calculated. Then we rebuild the rings," Wilson said simply. "Again." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden blaring of an alarm. The main screen in the command center flickered to life, showing Tom Miller, now Commander Miller, his face grim. "Admiral, we have a situation." Miller's voice was tight with tension. "The Hegemony has launched a major offensive against our colonies in the Ta-CD system." The Hegemony, a coalition of 3 aggressive alien species who had formed an alliance 5 years ago, had been making threatening moves along the borders of human space. Until now, they had limited themselves to small raids and diplomatic bullying. "How bad?" Wilson asked, though he could already tell from Miller's expression. "Bad, sir. They hit 6 colonies simultaneously. Orbital defenses were overwhelmed within hours. The Council has dispatched the 3rd Fleet, but—" Miller hesitated. "But what, Commander?" "Reports suggest the Hegemony has deployed a new type of shield technology. Our weapons are barely making a dent. The Third Fleet is taking heavy losses." Wilson closed his eyes briefly. Despite his disagreements with the Council, those were still his people dying out there. "Keep me informed, Commander. And be careful what information you share with me. I don't want to compromise your position." Miller's face hardened with resolve. "With respect, sir, if the hegemony keeps advancing at this rate, my position won't matter much longer." The screen went dark, leaving the lunar team in silence. Dr. Gray spoke first. "How long until the thunderclap is ready?" Wilson turned to face the half-built ship visible through the massive inner window of the command center. It hung in the center of the shipyard, parts of its hull seeming to fade in and out of visibility depending on the angle, an effect of the experimental materials used in its construction. "At our current pace, 6 months, minimum." Robert shook his head. "The colonies don't have 6 months. Tau Ceti is only 12 light years from Earth. If they've broken through there, then we work faster," Wilson said firmly. "Double shifts. I'll call in more favors, get more funding." 1 month later, the situation had grown desperate. The Third Fleet had been all but destroyed. The First and Fifth Fleets had been combined and sent to make a stand at the Alpha Centauri system, humanity's oldest and most populated colony. Commander Lisa Reed, who had once abstained from voting against Wilson's project, now found herself in command of what remained of Earth's home defense fleet, a collection of older vessels and training ships that wouldn't stand a chance against a determined hegemony attack. She sat alone in her office aboard the station Sentinel, reviewing the latest casualty reports when her aide entered. "Commander, you have a visitor. He says it's urgent." Reed looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Who is it?" "Commander Tom Miller, Mom." Reed's expression changed. Miller had been Wilson's assistant. After Wilson's retirement, Miller had taken a position in intelligence, and their paths rarely crossed. "Send him in." Miller entered, looking tired and worried. Without preamble, he placed a data crystal on her desk. "What's this?" Reed asked. "The location of humanity's best hope," Miller replied. "Admiral Wilson didn't give up on the thunderclap. He's been building it in secret." Reed's eyes widened. "That's highly illegal. He could be court-martialed." "Only if we survive long enough to hold courts-martial," Miller countered. "The hegemony broke through at Alpha Centauri yesterday. The combined fleet is in retreat. We have maybe 2 weeks before they reach Earth." Reed picked up the crystal, turning it in her fingers. "Is it real? Does his ship actually work the way he claimed it would?" "I don't know," Miller admitted. "I've been feeding him information and helping redirect resources when I could, but I haven't seen the ship myself in months. Last I heard, they were having stability issues with the main weapons system." Reed was quiet for a long moment. As the acting head of Earth's defenses, she was breaking multiple regulations by even considering this. But Miller was right. At this point, what did they have to lose? "Have my ship prepared," she ordered. "Tell no one where we're going." The journey to the lunar shipyard took only hours. Reed's ship, a small fast corvette, approached the dark side of the moon, where Wilson's facility was hidden within a crater. As they came around the rim, Reed gasped. Suspended in the middle of the crater was the thunderclap. And it was complete. The ship defied conventional description. Its hull seemed to bend light around it, creating a distortion effect that made it difficult to focus on any single part of the vessel. Portions appeared to overlap with themselves, creating impossible geometries that hurt the eyes to look at directly. "It's beautiful," Reed whispered, despite herself. Their ship landed in a small docking bay. Wilson himself was waiting for them, looking surprised to see Reed. "Commander Reed," he said, straightening his posture out of old military habit. "I wasn't expecting anyone from Defense Command." "The situation has changed, Admiral," Reed replied. "The hegemony has broken through at Alpha Centauri. Earth is next. Tell me honestly, does your ship work?" Wilson's expression was grim but determined. "The gravity manipulators function. We can create the spatial distortions necessary for both defense and offense, but we haven't been able to test the weapons system at full power. The energy requirements are enormous. Will it fight? Yes, Wilson said without hesitation, but I can't guarantee it will survive its first battle. Reed looked past him to where the impossible ship hung in the void. At this point, Admiral, survival is a luxury we can't afford to worry about. The Council needs to know about this immediately. Wilson nodded slowly. Then it's time for the thunderclap to make some noise. As they turned to leave for Earth, Reed took one last look at the ship. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The emergency session of the United Earth Defense Council was more chaotic than any meeting in its 50-year history. Councilors shouted over each other, while holographic displays showed the advancing Hegemony fleet. The alien armada had pushed past the ruins of humanity's defenses at Alpha Centauri and was now approaching Mars. We have less than 48 hours before they reach Mars orbit, General Peters announced, his voice cutting through the noise. The remaining ships of the combined fleet will make their stand there, but realistic projections give them no chance of success. Councillor Patel slammed his fist on the table. Then what do you suggest, General? Surrender. Before Peters could answer, the doors to the chamber slid open. Commander Reed entered, followed by Admiral Wilson. The room fell silent as faces registered shock and confusion. Admiral Wilson, Council President Alvarez said, recovering first. This is unexpected. You retired 3 years ago. Wilson stepped forward, his back straight despite the weight of the years. Retired is a polite way of putting it, Madam President, but that's not important now. What matters is that I have a ship that can stop the Hegemony. Murmurs swept through the room. Dr. Martin, who had been one of Wilson's harshest critics, laughed bitterly. Your impossible ship, the one that defied the laws of physics. Please tell me you're not wasting our time with this fantasy when we're facing extinction. Reed stepped forward. It's not a fantasy. I've seen it. She activated a holographic projector, showing footage of the thunderclap suspended in the lunar shipyard. Many counselors flinched or looked away, uncomfortable with how the ship's strange geometry affected their perception. You actually built it, Dr. Martin whispered, her academic curiosity momentarily overriding her skepticism. Against direct orders, noted General Peters. That's a court-martial offense. Court-martial me after I save Earth, Wilson replied evenly. The thunderclap is ready for deployment. All I need is your authorization. President Alvarez studied Wilson carefully. Even if this ship works as you claim, one vessel against an entire fleet, those are impossible odds. With respect, Madam President, Wilson said with a small smile, impossible is what the thunderclap does best. After a tense debate, the Council voted. This time, the decision was far from unanimous. But with Earth's survival at stake, even the skeptics couldn't afford to ignore any potential weapon. The thunderclap was authorized for immediate deployment to Mars. As the Earth grew smaller behind them, Wilson stood on the bridge of his impossible ship. Around him, a crew of just 50 operated stations that pulsed with strange energies. These were the true believers, scientists and engineers who had worked in secret for 3 years to bring his vision to life. Gravity manipulators at full power, reported Dr. Gray from her station. Field integrity is stable. Wilson nodded, his eyes on the main view screen that showed Mars growing larger ahead of them. Beyond the red planet, the sensors detected the massive Hegemony fleet, over 200 ships advancing in perfect formation. Time to arrival at Mars, Wilson asked. At conventional drive speeds, 10 hours, replied the navigator, a young man named Ryan. Wilson's lips curved into a slight smile. Let's show them what the thunderclap can really do. Activate the spatial displacement drive. Ryan looked nervous but excited. Yes, sir. Calculating fold parameters now. On the view screen, space itself seemed to bend around the ship. Stars stretched into lines, then swirled into a dizzying pattern that no human mind was meant to comprehend. There was a moment of vertigo so intense that several crew members clutched their stations for support. Then, suddenly, Mars filled the screen. "Spatial jump complete," Ryan announced, his voice filled with wonder. "We're in Mars orbit. Travel time: 3 minutes, 17 seconds. Wilson allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The first test of the ship's revolutionary drive had succeeded. Conventional ships would have taken hours to cover the same distance. "Send a message to Earth Defense Command," he ordered. "Tell them the thunderclap has arrived at Mars. We're engaging the enemy." On the bridge of his flagship, Hegemony War Commander Krell watched the approaching human fleet with contempt. Their pitiful remaining forces had gathered around the red planet in a desperate last stand. His sensors counted just 37 ships, most of them damaged from previous battles. "Pathetic," Krell growled to his second-in-command. "They should have surrendered when we offered terms." "Commander," called the sensor officer, his voice betraying confusion. "I'm detecting an anomaly near the human fleet." "Specify," Krell demanded. The officer adjusted his instruments. "Unknown. It appears to be a ship, but the readings make no sense. It's as if parts of it exist in multiple locations simultaneously." Krell's 6 eyes narrowed. "A sensor malfunction. Run diagnostics." "Diagnostics show all systems functioning normally, Commander. The anomaly is real, and it's moving." On the main view screen, a strange distortion appeared. It seemed to slide through space rather than fly through it, leaving visual echoes in its wake. As it approached, Krell felt an unfamiliar sensation: doubt. "Open a channel to all ships," he ordered. "Target that anomaly with all weapons. I want it destroyed before it gets any closer." Aboard the Human Defense Fleet's command ship, General Mason watched in disbelief as the thunderclap materialized seemingly from nowhere. "What in God's name is that?" he whispered. His tactical officer shook her head in wonder. "According to transponder codes, it's registered as an Earth defense vessel. The thunderclap." Mason's eyes widened. "Wilson's ship, the one that was denied by the Council years ago." Before the officer could respond, their communication system activated. Admiral Wilson's face appeared on screen. "General Mason," Wilson said with a nod of respect, "I suggest you move your fleet to a safe distance. What's about to happen might affect your ship's systems." Mason bristled at being ordered around. "This is still my operation, Admiral. I need to know what your ship is capable of before I reposition my forces." Wilson's expression softened slightly. "What it's capable of, General, is saving Earth. But the physics involved in its operation are disruptive. I'd hate for your crews to experience the side effects firsthand." Something in Wilson's tone convinced Mason. He gave the order, and the human fleet began pulling back. The Hegemony fleet launched its first volley. Hundreds of energy beams and projectiles streaked toward the thunderclap. Wilson watched calmly as they approached. "Gravitational defense field now," he ordered. Around the ship, space itself seemed to fold. The incoming fire didn't hit shields as it would with conventional vessels. Instead, the weapons fire bent around the thunderclap, curving away in impossible trajectories. Some shots actually looped back toward the ships that had fired them. On the Hegemony flagship, Krell watched in growing alarm as his fleet's most powerful weapons proved ineffective. "Impossible," he snarled. "Nothing can deflect concentrated fire from 200 ships." His sensor officer's voice was strained. "Commander, the anomaly is changing configuration. It appears to be preparing to what?" Krell demanded. The officer looked up, fear evident in his eyes. "I don't know. There's no reference for this in our database." Aboard the thunderclap, Wilson gave the order they had all been waiting for. "All power to the sonic gravity projectors," he said calmly. "Prepare to make some noise." "Sonic gravity projectors at full charge," reported Dr. Gray, her voice tight with tension. "Field integrity holding at 93%. Wilson nodded. This was the moment of truth. the culmination of years of work, ridicule, and secret development. No one had ever attempted to weaponize gravity waves at this scale. Theory said it would work, simulations said it would work, but reality often had other ideas. Target the lead hegemony vessels, Wilson ordered. Start at 10% power. Let's see how they respond before we commit fully. Ryan, at the weapons console, entered the commands with steady hands despite the pressure. Targeting complete. Sonic gravity projectors ready at 10% power. Wilson took a deep breath. Fire. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The thunderclap hummed slightly, and faint ripples appeared to distort the space around it, visible only as slight bending of the starlight behind the ship. Then the ripples expanded outward. Unlike conventional weapons, there was no beam, no projectile to track, just expanding rings of distorted space, moving at incredible speed toward the hegemony fleet. When the first ripple reached the nearest enemy vessels, the effect was subtle but immediate. The ship shuddered as though struck by an invisible hammer. Warning lights flashed across the thunderclap's bridge as feedback data streamed in. Effect confirmed, Ryan announced, excitement creeping into his voice. Enemy shields are fluctuating. Their power systems are experiencing harmonic disruption. Wilson allowed himself a small smile. Increased to 30% power. Let's turn up the volume. On the bridge of his flagship, War Commander Krell struggled to maintain balance as the deck seemed to vibrate beneath his feet. Warning sirens blared throughout the ship. "What is happening?" he demanded, his voice nearly drowned out by the cacophony of alarms. His science officer worked frantically at his station. "Unknown weapon type. It's generating some kind of wave effect. The waves are creating resonance patterns in our hull materials and shield generators." "Resonance?" Krell snarled. "You mean sound. In space." "Not sound exactly," the science officer replied, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and scientific fascination, "but functionally similar. The human vessel is somehow creating compression waves in space-time itself. These waves are propagating through our ships regardless of shields." Another, stronger wave hit the fleet. This time, smaller hegemony vessels began losing control, spinning as their stabilizers failed. On several ships, hull plates began to vibrate so intensely that they tore free, venting atmosphere into space. Krell slammed his fist on the communication panel. "All ships, evasive maneuvers. Spread formation. Target that human vessel with everything we have." But as his fleet tried to respond, a third wave hit, stronger than the previous two combined. Aboard the thunderclap, Wilson watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The hegemony fleet was in disarray, their tight formation broken as ships tried to escape the expanding gravity waves. "Damage report on enemy vessels?" he asked. Ryan checked his readings. Significant structural damage to approximately 40% of their fleet. Their smaller ships are suffering the worst effects. The wavelength seems to match their hull resonant frequencies perfectly. Dr. Gray looked up from her station, her expression concerned. "Admiral, the projector cores are heating faster than we anticipated. We're seeing microfractures forming in the containment rings." Wilson frowned. They had known this might happen. Creating these gravity waves put enormous strain on the ship's systems. "How long can we maintain current output?" "At 30% power. Maybe 20 minutes, Gray replied. "But that won't be enough to disable their larger vessels." Wilson studied the tactical display. The hegemony flagship and its escort of heavy cruisers remained largely unaffected by the gravity waves. They were regrouping, preparing to counterattack. "We need more power," he said decisively. "Increase to 60%. Gray's eyes widened. "Sir, at that level, we can't guarantee the containment rings will hold. If they fail, we lose this ship," Wilson finished for her. "If we don't stop that fleet, we lose Earth. The choice is clear." He turned to Ryan. 60% power. Target their flagship group." Across the solar system, something unprecedented was happening. As the thunderclap increased its power output, The gravity waves grew stronger and began to affect space itself in unexpected ways. On Earth, scientists at the Gravitational Wave Observatory were the first to notice. Their detectors, designed to measure the tiny ripples in space-time caused by distant cosmic events, suddenly went off the scale. "This can't be right," one researcher said, checking and rechecking the readings. "It's like someone's playing a massive bass drum in space." Similar effects were reported across every human and alien settlement in the system. On Mars, colonists felt the ground tremble beneath their feet. On Jupiter's moons, liquid water beneath icy crusts sloshed violently in massive waves. And throughout space, all communications were overwhelmed by a strange, pulsing interference that, when played through speakers, sounded like an immense, deep rumble, as if the void itself had found its voice. Everything was loud. The Thunderclap's bridge shook violently as the gravity projectors pushed past 60% power. Warning lights flashed at nearly every station. Containment rings at critical stress levels. Dr. Gray shouted over the deep, resonant hum that permeated the ship. Field integrity dropping to 82%. On the view screen, the effect on the Hegemony fleet was devastating. The gravity waves now carried enough energy to tear ships apart. The compression and expansion cycles created by the weapon stressed metal to its breaking point. Over 30 enemy vessels had already been reduced to expanding clouds of debris. But the Hegemony flagship and its 5 largest cruisers were still coming, pushing through the waves with their more robust construction. "They've adapted their shields," Ryan reported. "They're using counter-resonance to dampen the effect." Wilson grimaced. The Hegemony's technological adaptability was impressive, even in these circumstances. "How much more power can we give the projectors?" he asked. Gray's face was grim. "We're already past the safety limits. The exotic matter in the core is becoming unstable. If we push harder..." A violent shudder ran through the ship, cutting her off mid-sentence. Sparks showered from one of the engineering consoles. "Containment Ring 3 has failed," called an engineer from the back of the bridge. "Automatically rerouting through rings 1 and 2, but they won't hold for long." Wilson made his decision. "Divert all power from non-essential systems. Prepare for maximum output." "Sir," Ryan said hesitantly, "at maximum output, the simulations predict catastrophic system failure within minutes." "Then we have minutes to end this," Wilson replied. "Maximum power. Target their flagship directly." On the human defense fleet's command ship, now positioned safely behind Mars, General Mason and his crew watched in awe as the impossible battle unfolded. "My God," whispered Mason as he witnessed entire Hegemony ships crumple like paper toys under the assault of invisible forces. His communications officer turned with a shocked expression. "Sir, we're receiving reports from Earth, Luna, Mars, everywhere. The gravity waves are affecting the entire system. They're registering as far out as Neptune." Mason stared at the distant thunderclap, barely visible except for the strange distortions surrounding it. "Wilson, what have you created?" he murmured. Just then, the thunderclap seemed to pulse with a new intensity. The distortion field around it expanded dramatically, and a final massive wave rippled outward. When it reached the remaining Hegemony ships, there was no gradual effect. The ships simply came apart, their molecular bonds overcome by the precisely tuned gravity differentials. The flagship, over 2 kilometers long, split into 3 sections before each section disintegrated further. In less than 30 seconds, the pride of the Hegemony fleet was reduced to scattered atoms. But the thunderclap was glowing now, its hull radiating an unnatural light as systems overloaded throughout the vessel. Mason watched in horror as secondary explosions bloomed across Wilson's ship. "Get me a channel to the thunderclap," he ordered. Now, Admiral Wilson gripped his command chair as the thunderclap shuddered violently around him. Warning sirens blared from every station on the bridge, and emergency lighting flickered on as primary power systems failed throughout the ship. "Status report," he shouted over the cacophony of alarms. Dr. Gray worked frantically at her console, which sparked and smoked. Containment systems failing across the board. The exotic matter is destabilizing. We have minutes at most before total system collapse. Through the view screen, Wilson could see nothing but empty space where the Hegemony fleet had been moments before. They had done it. The impossible ship had achieved the impossible victory. But the cost would be high. All hands to escape pods, Wilson ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. Initiate emergency evacuation protocols. As the crew rushed to obey, the communication system crackled to life. General Mason's face appeared on screen, concern evident in his expression. "Wilson, what's happening over there? Your ship is lighting up our sensors like a solar flare." "Nothing to worry about, General," Wilson replied with a grim smile. "Just the price of progress. The Hegemony fleet is destroyed, but I'm afraid the thunderclap won't be joining your victory parade." Mason's expression turned serious. "We're dispatching rescue ships now. Can you stabilize?" "Negative," Wilson interrupted. "The exotic matter core is destabilizing. When it goes, you don't want anything nearby. Keep your distance. We're evacuating now." The transmission cut off as another system failed. Wilson turned to find Dr. Gray still at her station. "Doctor, I believe I ordered an evacuation," he said. She didn't look up from her work. "Someone needs to maintain the containment fields as long as possible to give the pods time to clear the blast radius." Wilson moved to stand beside her. "Then we'll do it together." 3 days later, Earth celebrated. The news of the thunderclap's victory had spread throughout human space, bringing hope where there had been only despair. The remaining Hegemony forces, learning of their main fleet's destruction, had retreated to their own territory. In the Grand Hall of the United Earth Defense Council, a very different meeting was taking place than the one 3 years ago, when Wilson had first presented his impossible design. This time, Wilson sat at the center of the table, his right arm in a sling, a small price to pay for the last-minute escape from the thunderclap before its final collapse. President Alvarez addressed the assembled counselors and military leaders. "Today we honor the courage and vision of Admiral Jack Wilson and his crew. Against all odds, and indeed, against our own skepticism, they created a weapon that saved humanity from certain defeat." Applause filled the room. Wilson nodded in acknowledgement, but his expression remained serious. When the applause died down, Dr. Martin raised her hand. The physicist who had once been Wilson's harshest critic now looked at him with newfound respect. "Admiral, I believe we all owe you an apology for dismissing your theories, but now we need to understand exactly how the thunderclap worked. The science behind it could revolutionize not just our defense systems, but our understanding of physics itself." Wilson exchanged glances with Dr. Gray, who sat beside him. They had discussed this moment during their recovery. The thunderclap worked by temporarily altering the fundamental constants of physics within a localized field, Wilson explained. "By manipulating gravity at the quantum level, we created a bubble where sound, or something very much like it, could propagate through space." He activated a holographic display showing complex equations. "However, there's a reason why the ship was considered impossible. The energy requirements are enormous, and the exotic matter we use to power the systems is inherently unstable. The thunderclap was never meant to be a permanent vessel. It was designed for a single decisive battle." Murmurs of surprise and disappointment spread through the room. "Are you saying we can't build more?" General Peters asked, frowning. "Not exactly," Wilson replied. "We can build improved vessels incorporating some of the thunderclap's technologies, but they'll need to be more limited in scope, more focused in their application of these principles." He nodded to Dr. Gray, who activated another display showing designs for smaller, more streamlined ships. "These vessels won't be able to create system-wide effects like the thunderclap did, but they'll still be far more advanced than anything we, or the Hegemony, have deployed before." President Alvarez studied the designs thoughtfully. "How soon can production begin?" "We've already prepared the specifications," Wilson said. "With proper funding and support, The first new ships could be operational within a year. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the news of the Thunderclap's impossible victory spread quickly among alien civilizations. On the Hegemony homeworlds, the ruling council faced an unprecedented crisis. "Our entire main fleet, gone," said War Minister Vex, his voice hollow with shock. "Destroyed by a single human vessel using technology we didn't believe was possible." High Counselor Dren, the leader of the Hegemony, stared at the sensor readings from the battle. The data made no sense. It showed violations of what they had believed were immutable laws of physics. "If the humans can build one such ship, they can build more," Dren said gravely. "We must sue for peace immediately, before they develop this technology further." War Minister Vex bristled. "Peace with humans? After centuries of hegemony expansion, you suggest we simply surrender?" "Not surrender," Dren corrected. "Strategic realignment. The humans have demonstrated capabilities beyond our understanding. We need time to study this new technology, to adapt our own sciences." After heated debate, the Hegemony Council voted. For the first time in its 1,000-year history, the Hegemony would seek peace rather than conquest. 1 month later, Wilson stood by the viewport in his new office at Earth Defense Headquarters, looking up at the stars. Commander Reed entered, carrying a data tablet. "The diplomatic court reports that the Hegemony peace delegation will arrive next week," she said. "Their message indicates they're willing to discuss very favorable terms." Wilson nodded, still gazing at the stars. "And our new ships. The first prototype begins construction tomorrow. We're calling it the Echo class. Not as dramatic as the Thunderclap, but still impressive. Dr. Gray says they've solved the containment problems that plagued the original design." Wilson smiled slightly. "Good. We'll need them." Reed studied him curiously. "You don't think the Hegemony truly wants peace?" "Oh, they want peace now," Wilson said, "but only because they're afraid. Once that fear fades, once they believe they've understood and countered our technology." He let the thought hang unfinished. "Then we'll need to be ready," Reed concluded. Wilson finally turned from the viewport. "Humanity has always excelled at achieving the impossible, Commander. Now the rest of the galaxy knows it too." As they walked together toward the meeting where they would plan Earth's new fleet, Wilson reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From ridicule to vindication, from retirement to salvation. They had said his ship was impossible, until it appeared. And when it did, everything was loud enough for the entire galaxy to hear. Humanity had found its voice among the stars, and it would never be silenced again.